Welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Head of Sports Science at Southampton Football Club, Alek Gross. This episode of the Pacey Performance Podcast is sponsored by Performance, the team behind the NordBord hamstring testing system. So the NordBord is the fastest and easiest, most accurate way to measure hamstring strength. So with the NordBord, you'll get the right information to make the right decisions at the right time. If you want to check them out, you can check them out at valdperformance.com. This episode of the Pacey Performance Podcast is sponsored by Train with Push, creators of the Push Band. So the Push Band is the first scientifically validated wearable device to provide objective insights into your performance in the gym. So using accelerometers and a gyroscope, the Push Band is able to use bar speed to regulate load and volume based on your ability in the gym on any given day. So you can use the Push Band to quickly establish 1RMs with submaximal load so you can plan with confidence. So the Push Band portal also allows you to create programs before entering the gym to make change on the fly depending on how you are performing on that given day. So you can customize everything from target velocity ranges to differentiating velocities for warm-up and creating working sets and supersets for yourself or your athletes. So if you do want to know more about Train with Push and the Push Band, get yourself over to trainwithpush.com. They also got a great blog, so you can catch up with some guest bloggers such as Mladen Ivanovic and Dan Baker. So be sure to check them out at trainwithpush.com. Thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast. So today, delighted to get Alek Gross on from Southampton, who is the Head of Sports Science. So welcome to the podcast, Alek.
Cheers, mate.
Do you just want to give us a little bit of background on you? Anyone that doesn't know who you are, and obviously Head of Sports Science, but what you're doing now at Southampton?
Yeah, so Head of Sports Science at the minute. So I've been here for 3 years now. Started off in the academy, and then so I've been in this role about 2.5 years now. So my job really is to manage and deliver sort of the strength and conditioning, sports science, nutrition, and some of the psychology elements of the service that we provide for the first team and then the academy. So it's part delivery and then part managing and supporting the staff that work within the department.
Mm-hmm. So what were you doing before Southampton?
So way back when I started off working in rugby league, so sort of in 2006. So I was working with the Leeds Rhinos for 5 seasons. Started off as an intern there and ended up staying for 5 years, and then had an interim period where I was lecturing in sports science in the HE department at Hartbury College, and then sort of moved here. So a bit of time in rugby, a bit of time in higher education, and then obviously 3 years in football off the back of that.
Mm-hmm. So what did you bring over from rugby? What were your biggest influences in rugby that have made their way into your football days?
I think the main one is, I started working, when I started my first job there was Tony Smith was the coach and Franny Cummins was one of the assistants, and pretty much from the word go they would question you and you had to be able to rationalise your decisions and your opinions, and I think from initial stages as an early professional, I think that's really good to make sure that you can justify what you're saying. Because if you can't justify it to them, you can't justify it to the players, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. And I guess that's what I do now. I try and justify everything that I'm doing, in whether it to be coaches or to players or to the staff, just to make sure that we're making the right decisions for the right reasons. So I guess that sort of grounding was good. I also think it was it was a very successful environment to be in as well. So some of the key characteristics from the staff and from the players have sort of shaped how I think things should be done as well, in terms of how people act, how people behave, how people apply themselves in training. So I think just taking some of the real positives about about being in a high performance and a successful environment are some of the things I've taken over really.
So what's your relationship like with coaches in football compared to your relationship with coaches in rugby? I mean, I've been a little bit just on the periphery in rugby league, but it seems obviously it's generally not normally a smaller team because of obviously finances and things.
Yeah.
But how does, from a kind of sports science S&C perspective, what's the relationship differences across the sports?
I think there's probably a wider acceptance of sports science and strength and conditioning in rugby league. Born out of the fact that a lot of the coaches are ex-players, so they're used to, and have had that during their career, so there's an expectation for that. So there's probably a better understanding. Also, there's just an absolute requirement for it. If you look at a rugby league player, if they're not big, fast, powerful, strong, it doesn't matter how technically gifted they are, they're not going to be able to survive. So I think the absolute requirement for it makes sort of the relationships and selling the processes, if you like, that a little bit easier. Now, I've been very fortunate to come to a football club that has very similar coaches. So they understand the requirements to be physically robust. They understand why strength is important. They understand all sorts of the monitoring and the sports science aspects that we try and what we do apply across the club. So I've been very fortunate that, but I'm aware that might not be reflected across all football teams. That being said, I'm in a fortunate position where the staff that have been in my position before I got here have always had very similar philosophies and done well in terms of working with the coaches and players. But we also work quite heavily in terms of delivering coach CPD for first team academy coaches, scouting and recruitment, just to make sure that they know why we're doing what we're doing. So it's not just that it happens out of earshot, out of sight. They understand exactly what we're doing and the purpose for it before we do it. So I think on the whole, rugby is a bit more attuned to sports science, strength and conditioning, but certainly this football club's good, and I'd suggest that there's quite a few others that are as good, and a lot of clubs have improved on that.
Because it does get a bad rap, like we've said before. Yeah. It does get abused I
think it's. It's born from people that probably haven't been in this environment. I know I may have had a similar opinion prior to it. There is a misunderstanding of A, what is required to play football, and B, what goes on in football clubs. There'd be very few, if any, that haven't got strength programs as part of their program, and it might not be the absolute be all and end all, but all players will perform, and they certainly do at our club, some form of strength-based programming. I know our academy, it's quite a heavy focus on our physical development plan. Is strength underpinning everything, and that is carried on to the first team. But I think people externally have a misconception of what we in football actually do, and also the priorities might not actually be that. The priority to play rugby league, you have to be of a certain strength and a certain size in order to compete. In football, yes, it is important, but there might be other aspects that are more important for that player. And unless you're working in that team, that environment, or that player, then you don't know that. And it's relatively easy to cast aspersions. But yeah, I'd say that there is a bad rap, but it is mostly from people who haven't even been in to see the environment.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the academy,
do
you just want to talk to us a little bit about the kind of culture of strength strength training playing a big part in the lads' development? Just maybe a few details around kind of what's involved in that program. Maybe coming towards the time where they do go, it's kind of do or die for first team, and maybe a little bit of detail there.
I mean, from like the physical perspective, it's got a pretty sort of clear-cut and robust performance plan in terms of what's expected at what age groups as they go through. Now, our players come in from the age of 7, and at that point they are doing what will broadly or loosely be termed as strength-based stuff. It is based around locomotion and fundamental movements. But it is certainly underpinning some movement patterns and some neural development in terms of that aspect, alongside some. We encourage sort of multi-sport at that lower end as well. So sampling other sports, they are required to train quite a lot of football hours. So we try and make sure we balance that out with relevant multi-sports. That might include sort of basketball, volleyball, but also judo, gymnastics, which again has some relatively good crossovers in terms of strength development. And then from that, we've got a competency model that runs throughout the club. So regardless of whether you're 11 or you're in the first team, you're sort of somewhere on that scale, because we might sign a player with potentially from another country that's got zero training history in terms of strength-based programming, and he can't then just jump on board with what the first teamer who maybe have been in our system for 10 years can do. So he might have a similar type program to one of our younger players in terms of competency, and then it basically increases from simple to more complex movements, and then we either increase the complexity of the movement or we'll increase the load of the movement, depending on the individual, the time that we've got, and their sort of individual requirements. And it's pretty straightforward in terms of its push, pull, press, hip dominant, knee dominant, and some unilateral stuff, and some brace rotate. So it's not overly complicated, but it just means that whenever a player comes in at any stage in the program, they can jump somewhere in that, and it makes it easier for when players jump between age groups, because we like to promote players from upwards, because we want as many players in the first team as possible. It's just so that when they move between coaching staff or training groups, they're comfortable in what they're doing, the coaches are happy to prescribe what they're doing, and ultimately the player keeps progressing on that. So it's just a basic competency-based program, but it's a pretty essential part of what we do.
So is it like an ongoing testing process? So if they tick certain boxes within that training session, or is there an actual, like every 6 weeks, one session will be a competency test, and either they move on or they don't move on?
Yeah, I mean it's down to it. There is that competence within them. We run 4-week sort of cycles anyway in the gym, and at that stage, it's the individual coaches' then decision to decide whether we're going to increase load and keep those movements the same, or increase the complexity. I mean, younger down, it'll typically be an increase in the complexity of movement, and older, if we've sort of got less time, we want to get as much sort of progress as we can. We might just load simple exercises just to get some quicker adaptation. So it's sort of dependent on the coach that's working with that, the needs of that individual player. So we sort of do every 6 weeks there'll be a player review, so individual player review from physical perspective, psychological, education if they're still in there, and then a sort of technical, tactical. And at that point, that type of thing is discussed. So what are his performance needs in those areas? What's his next plan of action going to be? I think lower down, it's in the younger age groups or the adolescent age groups, particularly, it's dependent on sort of growth status. So if they're going through a big growth spurt, then we'll probably actually go back down the scale. So we go back down to more simple movements, take some load off, and then re-educate those movements until they're at a point where they're comfortable in their new, longer and taller body, and then we can start loading those movements again. So
is that structure that you just talked about then carried on in the first team?
Yeah. Okay. So it's essentially with pretty much all the processes that we do, not just in our department. I mean, it's in terms of coaching and playing philosophy, in terms of how the analysts assess games and the information that's provided to players and coaches. And then in addition to what we do, we very much try and keep the same all the way through. So the very similar processes, it helps us track players, things that work and the things that don't. It also means that, as I said earlier on, players are comfortable. It's not they've gone from the under-21s and they go to the first team and everything's completely different. They're already in a pretty stressful environment. If we change too many things, it makes them feel uncomfortable. It makes them stand out. It's potentially any new stimulus that they haven't got time to adapt to increases the risk of injury. So we just keep everything in terms of processes from the first team down or from the under-8s up, whichever way you want to look at it, pretty standard just so everyone's comfortable. We can monitor players as they go through the system. If people train with different squads on different days, it's easier to monitor progress and to deliver sessions. So yeah, all first team down is pretty similar.
Excuse me. So just carry on the kind of academy theme.
Yep.
You've had plenty of people come through the academy.
Yep.
And obviously a lot are still there. Many have moved on. Obviously Walcott and a few of the guys been a kind of more high profile. But how do you, as staff, a club wide really, consistently keep developing these players compared to a system at another club? Not talking about other clubs, but compared to other clubs that don't. And there's stats saying there's not been a player in the first team for so many years, but you keep churning them out.
I think it comes from, there's a pretty strong philosophy within the club, so set from way up at board level about there's an expectation that we produce players, so we want half of our first team to have come through our system. So that from the outset is a very strong and direct sort of directive from up high onto what we need to do, and then they'll support that. So the support in terms of staffing and facilities and investment into the academy to give the staff that work there the best possible chance of doing it. So there's definitely a clear expectation on that. I think it's also pretty clear of the club have an expectation of what a Southampton player looks like. So technically, what should it look like? Tactically, physically, even socially, what do our players look like at the end point? So in terms of when they're a first team player, what do we want them to look like? And because we've got a clear end point, it makes it a lot easier further down the line, either to identify ones that are on that trail. So when we're trying to recruit players, do they have similar qualities to the ones that we're trying to nurture? If there's a point in their progression where they're off hat on that, I mean, it talks about the player reviews every 6 weeks, we can go back to that and identify which of the areas are they not achieving on and work on those. There's a pretty clear directive as to what the player should look like, and that's sort of constantly reviewed in terms of how it should be. I think we're pretty fortunate. I'll just talk about the sports science because I can't really talk for everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But we've got, we're pretty fortunate that we've got members of staff that work. So the 3 lads that work for me in my schoolboy department, and they're absolutely passionate about adolescent and paediatric science. They're not overly interested in. A lot of people that get into professional sport will look up and they'll want to work in older age groups or first team, which can have an impact on sort of consistency of service and delivery. They're absolutely passionate about that and are rewarded for being experts in that area. They're our best coaches in terms of delivery because they need to do most coaching, and I think that's reflected across sort of the football coaches and the analysts and the teachers and the support services that are around the players as well. That we have people that are experts in that area and are happy working in that area, so they're not really looking up or looking sideways. They want to develop. They want to be the best under 15s coach they can be, and I think having that at each aspect sort of promotes it. So we're required to do it, but then we've also got the staff and the facilities and the investment from above that helps us develop it. The other thing is from a sports science perspective, sometimes it's quite hard because we have pretty small squad sizes. So therefore, if someone is good enough, they will play up an age group or play a couple of age groups to give them that opportunity and that exposure. Whereas some clubs that have massive squads, or then have massive squads that are out on loan and all that sort of thing, they might not necessarily get the chance. And our players get the chance. And I think it's infrequent that a player will be given a chance in the first team or an 18s or playing the 21s or all the way down, and that player doesn't perform. And I think because we have small squad sizes and because we have sort of similar systems across the club, it's easy to do that. And then when the players get their opportunity, they're comfortable, they know the system that they're playing in, they're familiar with what's happening, and therefore they're more likely to perform in that environment.
Because it's one thing that's constantly talked about with regards to the lads that are working with the younger age groups, where they should be the better coach. They should be the best coaches because they've got the most time with the players, and they're at a certain age where adaptation can happen and things like that. But it sounds like that is actually that's been put in place at Southampton.
Yeah, so it's not it's neither better or worse. It's just the skill set in which they are good at. So the first team staff have a certain skill set in terms of knowledge, delivery, interpersonal skills that are different. They're different, but they're not better or worse than the ones that work with schoolboys. Similar to the ones that work with the 18s and 21s. That's a very specific age group in terms of their requirements, physically, emotionally, all those things. So by placing staff that are good in those age groups and are happy working with those age groups, I think it just allows the system to work rather than people trying to look up and thinking, I want to be in the first team because it's glamour and I'll get paid more and stuff. Well, no, you get rewarded if you're good in the age group that you work with. And I think that's part of the success, I think.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me on to an article I think came out in a pretty shitty newspaper a couple of months ago about the biobanding of players in the academy.
Yeah.
And it probably came out about 10 years after it actually started, as all these kind of things do. But you just want to talk to us a little bit about first the reason for that and maybe why you went down that route in the first place.
It's essentially born out of we need to produce academy players, so we need to make sure, I said before, about we know what our first team looks like, so we know what physically we look like, tactically, all that sort of stuff. So we've got a mould as to what we're aiming for. Now, when we looked at relative age effects, is not a new phenomenon. It's really old and it's explicit across most sports. When we looked at our foundation academy and then our youth academy, they didn't match up. So our first team squad is typically around about 25% for each quartile. It wasn't reflected that lower down, so we were heavily overly invested in Q1, so quartile 1 players, and those born September, October, November. And we know if we look at the output that actually isn't going to work for us. So we're probably recruiting, and actually if we look through it, we're releasing a lot of Q4s and retaining more Q1s. So we're not recruiting the right players, and we're probably releasing the wrong ones. So that as a starting point was, okay, that's a bit of an issue. And this has been on at the club for a while, so I'm not claiming any sole credit for this. I'll talk about some of the stuff we've done recently, but this is work that's been done at the club for a while there. So relative age effect was a bit of an issue. We're recruiting and possibly retaining the wrong players. So we needed to do something about it. So we essentially we use a Camis Roach method. So predicted adult height. So we work out how tall they're going to be, and then as a percentage of that, so you're 8% of your predicted adult height, and we sort of band them in that way. So work out how tall they're going to be. Percentage of that is reflective of their stage of maturation, and then we can start looking at comparing people on a maturational status rather than a sort of a chronological status, which has helped us for a number of reasons, really. So I think some of the other things that we looked at, our later maturing players, we've got a much higher percentage through the system. So if you're a Q4 or you're a late maturing player, and you're lucky enough to get through the system, because a lot of them did get released, not so much anymore, your chance of being a first team player is a lot higher. So we produced a lot more, and then you look at the research behind that, and you start coming up with underdog theory and all those sort of pretty well known theories on players that will, because they are physically less able or less strong, they develop a greater technical ability, because they have to make up the shortcomings somewhere, and they also develop a sort of psychological robustness as well, in order to compete with those bigger, stronger boys. So the Q4s are getting that as part of their development naturally. So we then looked at, well, how do we make sure that our first quartile boys get that at some point in our system? So it goes back to the biobanding. We basically train and play matches on chronological age, so it's as it would be across everywhere else. But we'll also do training and matches in terms of our biobanded age groups as well. So you might have our 89 to 95 percenters, say, play each other. And within that, you might have an under 12 and an under 15. So they're just in that way the match. So when we're assessing the players, so we're assessing their competencies and scouting recruitment, and coaches are giving their match grades, which they're retained or released on, they're actually competing against people of a similar maturational status. They still might have small ones and big ones, but the small ones are always going to be small and the big ones probably always going to be big. But it's not matched on height or weight. It is on their stage of development. And in doing that, we talked about player reviews before, every 6 weeks or 12 weeks, we can change those groups around to allow the early developers within their age group, they then will train with people of a higher maturational status. So even though they're an early maturer for an under 14, say, they will get the opportunity to be a late maturer in their training age group. So they'll get the benefits of being an underdog, even though they are an early maturer. So hopefully in that way, we're giving our early maturing players the same benefits as a late maturing player might get in terms of the technical development and the psychological robustness. So yeah, we sort of train and play on that and expose people to each part of that. So everyone, hopefully in their time, will have been an early maturer against people who are physically more dominant, a late maturer against people who are physically less dominant, and then a match status as well. So they get the whole sort of benefit of sort of skilled psychological and physical robustness through that.
Interesting. So I just want to move on a little bit to stay in the academy. Well, I suppose loosely, but with the likes of the two that pop into my head are Walcott and Oxlade-Chamberlain, both very explosive players.
What, Gareth Bale?
Yeah, don't talk about him. Not at the moment. Yeah, Gareth Bale. Yeah, and you've thrown me off now with that comment about the Welsh. Yeah, so talk about the explosive players that have come through the system.
Yeah.
Do you just want to talk about how you manage them guys?
Yeah.
Is there some sort of thoughts that I suppose a philosophy that is born out of them explosive players, and then how you manage them on a day-to-day basis compared to everyone else?
It's probably going to sound relatively boring, but we sort of treat every player pretty similarly. So in terms of say monitoring, for instance, we just look, we measure various things, and we're just looking at sort of differentiation from expected norms for that individual. So whether they're an explosive player, their normative profile will be different on certain elements to someone who's maybe not as explosive. But we're just looking for differences outside of that normative profile for that player, for us to make any sort of amendments to training programs off the back of that. So it's not necessarily just on the powerful athletes, it's sort of across the board that we'd measure. Again, I'm saying the same thing. We have pretty similar processes across age groups and across players, just to allow sort of similarity of service, really. So there's nothing exceptional. I mean, we've got explosive players at the minute that react, that on the pitch would look like explosive players. They measure explosively in terms of gym-based sessions and on what we assess in there, but they'll react differently to certain session types. So it's just a requirement to find out what their norm is, and then if it deviates from that, then we can adapt based on that. Mm-hmm.
Just looking at a few things that I'd written down, I've missed something out that I'd like to ask you about, and it's something you mentioned a couple of times, and that was recruitment.
Yeah,
I'd spoke to Phil Coles at San Antonio Spurs, and he'd written an article about this, and we discussed it in the podcast about how heavily he's involved in the recruitment process. Obviously, a completely different beast with how much he can be involved because of the draft and actually seeing these guys before they're signed or not signed. Obviously, that's not the case in football and kind of traditional sports. But how much say do you get in the recruitment process?
I think again, because we've sort of based on stats, for instance, that when people aren't in our club, and because there's no draft, it's reasonably difficult to then compare externals to what we currently have in the first team setting. Lower down, we're in every sort of recruitment meeting. So anytime there's a retain or release, or if someone's been on trial and we're deciding, there's either myself or a member of the sports science team that are in there. So again, we've got a profile of what we think a player should look like at each stage of development. And then we can give feedback based on their, if they're above or below the curve. Obviously taking into consideration training age in that, if there's someone coming in who's done zero training and they're below the curve, then there's the discussion on if we think that we'll be able to advance their physical program or physical development, and then B, if we're going to do that, there's some discussion and debate. Well, if that's going to be the case, then in terms of their training program, where are we going to get time back from maybe technical development for that player to get the physical development he needs? So then there's a discussion between the coaching staff, medical staff, sports science staff as to the individual needs of that player. Certainly there'll be higher up, there's certain conversations around players in terms of opinions. We'll obviously look at due diligence around injury, match times. There's some occasions where you might go and watch some games, but it's difficult. That's all sort of subjective opinions. We'd like to be as objective as possible, but at the minute we're not in a position to necessarily get hard data on potential signings.
Mm-hmm. So with your recent forays into Europe, how does your kind of weekly structure change up when you've got the dreaded Thursday night games in Europe, and maybe how your specific points in the week, as in your kind of on-field sessions, gym-based sessions, how they look and maybe how they change with that kind of consistent, ruthless 2 games a week?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think our foray into Europe was relatively short last year, which wasn't the best. But sorry, this year we've qualified for league stages, so there'll be a lot more of that. Essentially, we're preparing ourselves for fixture congestion. So you just treat it as you would do, say, the Christmas or the festive period, but we need to do it in a short period of time. So essentially, we're going from now or from next week when the players are back in. And we need to prepare our players to perform 3 games a week from the second week in September. So it's not a massive period of time in order to get people prepared for that. So essentially, how we devise that and how we plan that is we go off the data that we've currently got. So in any given game, so we'll take what is the worst case scenario for a player in any given position. So what was the hardest game they've had since they've been in here, and what does that look like to that player? We'll times that by 3, and essentially we've got till September 15th to make sure that they can deal with that comfortably. So it's not that they can do that for 1 week because they need to recover and be able to play and recreate that the week after. So again, we've got an end point in terms of the metrics, if you like, of what they need to be able to do to perform, and then we just track back. So given time, the time that we've got, how are we going to increase that in a sensible manner? I mean, everyone's seen the cute chronic stuff that's been going around. Everyone's been to the workshops. But essentially, we run off that. We've run off that before. We're just looking at making sure our chronic load is high enough, if that's the term you want to use, making sure that we haven't got really high acute spikes. Now, because of the short amount of time, that has a bit of an impact on our off-season program. So some of the off-season stuff that the boys have been doing has been higher than it would have been before, just so that they come back at a higher level than they have been, so the spikes aren't as serious as they will be in order to prepare them for September. So there's been a bit of long-term planning in terms of off-season stuff as well. I mean, in a typical week, Saturday to Saturday, if we were just playing once a week, there will be 1 day off. I mean, we run a sort of a 3-week recycle in a way where you've got low week, moderate week, hard week, not necessarily in that order. But typically week to week they'll do 2 strength sessions, so like a strength, and then the second session will be more of like a power or a stim based session. Within a week, obviously, when we've got 3 games in that week, they won't do any. Typically, is they'll be travelling. If we look at our fixtures either side of them, we've got some overnight trips, sort of the game after Europe, and also some of the game before. So we just have to strip them out and ensure that the load that week is just matches. So there's no other real load in them weeks. So yeah, gym stuff will get taken out, and we also need to look at programming in some heavy weeks leading that into that, just to make sure that they are prepared in terms of performing. So reducing sort of days off, making sure there's some pretty heavy load in terms of training to make sure that when they get to it, the games aren't actually that hard. And I think on that as well is is the importance of the team that aren't playing. We typically don't change our team that much, and it's in season, especially in football. It's quite easy to maintain the fitness capacity if you just want to maintain other people that are playing, because they've got at least one match, and then they'll have a hard training session during the week. But if the boys that aren't playing, particularly early in the season, that might be required to play in if we get an injury and they need to play 3 games in a week, we need to make sure that the boys that aren't playing replicate that. So our fit and unselected sessions and our sessions on match days when they don't play are obviously pretty important, and the ability to replicate match demands without playing a match becomes pretty vital for them as well. So making sure the team behind the team is ready. So typically we'll do Monday will be like a restart day. Tuesday will be intensive stuff, so a lot of accels and decels. Creates quite a bit of DOMs and soreness for the gym session after that. So lunch, gym session. Wednesday, day off or an extensive session. Thursday, sort of match prep, and then Thursday, sort of phases of play and unit work. Friday, match prep and travel, and then play Saturday. So we typically have a match, 2 loading sessions. One is intensive in nature, so small areas. One's extensive in nature, so larger areas. And then sort of the unit working around that, in addition to the 2 gym sessions. And then every field session is preceded by a pre-ab and a pre-act session as well.
Can you go into any of the detail on what the sessions look like?
In terms of
in terms of the gym sessions on the Tuesday and the Thursday, the strength and power sessions.
So Tuesday session, take a typical session. So they'll do it will. I mean, depending on the player, but typically a normal strength-based session would be, again, depending on the competency, a squat or deadlift movement. So it'll be a bilateral hip dominant and a bilateral knee dominant in a given week. So across the 2, a unilateral one of those in a given week. There'll be a push, pull, a press, and a brace rotate. So we might do front squat, of which, depending on the time of year, is within normal parameters in terms of 4 sets of 5 or whatever we're doing. Single leg IDL, bench press, inverted row, and then sort of a pallet press or med ball rotation throws, that type of thing. So it's pretty standard gym-based programming, really.
And how does that differ to your power session?
So the Thursday session is just by type of exercise. So,
okay, yeah.
It may be we use some Vertimax stuff for resisted sprinting. It might be that we're doing jump squats, box jumps, bounds, hurdle hops, plyos, that type of thing. So it just takes some of the load out in terms of volume, and we're just looking at fast movements with relatively low loads at the back end of that week in season, just because it's just making sure that they're fresh for the end of the week, but they're still getting some stimulus in terms of practicalities in applying that strength on field.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned off season there, and I'd written that down. It's something that's obviously the time of year at the minute. It's something that I've been chatting to a couple of people about, and what the off season looks like now compared to maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago, where lads would maybe get 6 weeks off and hope for the best when they came back. That's obviously not going to be the case. What does you said it's a bit more intense with regards to the stuff that you're asking your boys to do this off season. So what does it look like for the guys that aren't involved in, internationals and things, just the lads that finish on the last day of the season and will come back first day of pre-season? What's theirs look like?
Yeah, so they'll have been away from the club for 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
At that stage. They get relatively simple programs that are based around energy system maintenance or development, where we're aware that where they're going to be, it's going to be in a hotel or that type of facility for the majority of the time. So most of them won't come in. So typically we'll start with sort of aerobic based sessions, so low steady state stuff, and then we just drop that down into sort of VBO2 or mass running, S running, and then high speed work towards the end of it. So we've basically gone down energy system continuum based around that. So they get 2 weeks off, at some point. So it's not always the first 2 weeks that they get off. I say off. They only do one session a week that week. And then outside of that, they'll do three field-based sessions or 3 running sessions. And then they'll do 2 or 3 gym-based sessions in there as well. The gym-based sessions are, again, relatively simple, but they're based around sort of strength-based parameters. So sets off 5, so relatively moderate sort of rep ranges and relatively high load for them. So they'll do 2 strength sessions a week, and then they've got 3 running sessions. Again, it's just to make sure that so to start off with, there'll be slow, steady state stuff, 4 sets of 4 blocks, 4 minutes, then 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off type stuff. In terms of energy system development, we're aware that if we make it too complicated, they're probably not going to do it. If we make it, we won't tell them to run on a pitch, because if someone run on the pitch near the house, then they'll probably get a small stadium full of people watching.
Mobbed.
So we kind of restricted in that regard in terms of what we can do. It's based around treadmills most of the time. So we have to balance up what you'd like to do with what's practical and what you think the players will actually do. And there's other ways around that. There's certain ways of WhatsApp really good for getting people to take pictures and check in with information, rather than getting them to download certain bits of kit and software. If we just get them, you don't have to do it with most, but some players you might want to just make sure that they check in terms of taking pictures of what they've actually done. Based on that, so running sessions and gym-based sessions in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for that. I appreciate the detail going into what you guys are doing. But I just wanted to, as I always am, I'm just conscious of time, and you're having a long day with what's going on down there. So where can people keep up to date with what you've got going on?
I guess Twitter's as good a place as any. We're looking. Well, we are going to start. I went to see Joyce at GWS, and they've got a pretty good Twitter activity over there, and we're just going to set up sort of a blog and that sort of thing for just the staff within our department to discuss sort of products we've done, programs we've done, things we might have been and seen. Other than that, you can. I'm at Alek Gross on Twitter. I'm not as over the top of some people, but if there's something good, I might retweet or make a comment. That sort of keeps up to date. And we're also we've got some journal articles coming out pretty soon. One's going to hopefully, it's going to be in BGSM in terms of some of our loading stuff. So looking at acute, chronic, and accumulation of load and injury stuff. We like to be pretty open in terms of what we do. We'll publish stuff that we actually do, try and discuss it if we can, and also if people want to come in, then we're pretty welcome in terms of people can come and have a look, and especially the ones that look down on football, they're welcome anytime.
Cool. Well, I again, like I said before, I appreciate the openness about what you guys are doing down there. So, thanks very much.
No worries, mate.
No worries, and we'll catch up soon.
Yeah. Cheers, Rob.
All right, pal. See you, mate.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 96 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. As always, would really appreciate your feedback on guests, on how things are formatted. Any feedback is always welcome. So don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Pacey Perform, and you can keep up to date with everything that's going on the podcast over the next couple of weeks. So I hope you enjoyed the chat with Alek. Keep tuned in for a big episode 100 coming up, which is great. And I will speak to you in episode 97.